Hello, welcome to the Go Higher Frequency Astrology channel. My name is Suzanne, and today I'm going to be reviewing some of the important cycles that are feeding into the Cancer Capricorn moon cycle this month, as well as sharing some insights about the upcoming year for the United States. I'm going to be looking at the solar return for the Sibley chart that's happening on July 4th, which happens to coincide with Neptune stationing retrograde this year. I think one of the best ways to improve your astrological forecasting analysis is to do your analysis in light of mundane events. I never thought I'd be interested in mundane astrology, but I'm so thankful that I dedicated my analysis this year to mundane events because it's really helped me fine-tune my forecasting skills for my clients. In fact, I find the analysis of cycles to be key in personal chart analysis. It's why my offerings include cycle analysis, with my clients participating in that analysis. I not only find it enlightening, but I also find that it helps us process stuck emotions from past cycles, and it helps the evolutionary journey for our future cycles. With awareness, we can hope to channel our energy more productively as we release ourselves from past patterns that keep us stuck. As I was looking closer at this month's moon cycle, I realized that since it was on the cardinal cross, it included sun-moon squares that were related to the Libra and Aries eclipses from 2023 and 2024. The Libra-Aries nodal cycle is directly related to the cycles of conflicts that we see in the Mideast. Because the eclipse cycles overlapped this year with our final Aries eclipse happening in March, we have seen these conflicts drag on past the Aries-Libra nodal cycle. We are seeing a ceasefire play out right now. But since this month was simply a teaser of the main Neptune-Saturn conjunction in Aries perfecting next February, it's definitely not the main event. This cycle harkens back to the Neptune-Saturn conjunction that happened in Libra in 1953. And do you know what happened during that cycle? I'm going to be reading from an AI summary about this conflict, and there are some names that I don't think I'll pronounce correctly, so please forgive me. In 1953, the most significant conflict in the Middle East was the 1953 Iranian coup, also known as the 28 Mordad coup. This event involved the overthrow of the democratically elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh by the Iranian army, with the support of the United States and the United Kingdom. The coup was driven primarily by a desire to protect British oil interests in Iran after Mossadegh nationalized the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. The United States and the UK also feared that Iran could fall under Soviet influence if Mossadegh remained in power. Sound familiar? The United States, through the CIA, and the United Kingdom through M16, orchestrated the coup, codenamed Operation Ajax. This involved a covert operation that utilized propaganda, bribery, and the mobilization of local opposition groups to destabilize Mossadegh's government. The coup led to the reinstatement of Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, who ruled as an autocratic monarch until the Iranian Revolution of 1979, which is still in place today. The event also contributed to deep-seated anti-American sentiment in Iran and had lasting impacts on U.S.-Iran relations. And this revolution in 1979 happened during the Saturn-Neptune closing square of that cycle. And guess what happened during the closing square of the last cycle in 2015? That was our president's first term. And it's also when we had a lot of uprising against immigration. So we're seeing that feed into this new cycle. And the United States happens to have its Saturn in Libra. So as you can see, we have karma related to these Mideast conflicts. And, you can see that karma playing out right now because we've done things in the past that have contributed directly to these conflicts. And, will likely continue to feed into these conflicts because it's cyclic. Now, eventually, hopefully, we'll evolve out of these conflicts, but it's not that easy. So now we're on the opposite side of the wheel from that cycle. What will that bring? Well, we know that this cycle is happening near the IC instead of the 10th house in the Sibley chart. So we are now internally confronting what we've seeded into the outer world, especially during that cycle. It's almost like we're becoming our own version of Iran, not as extreme, of course, not yet. Hopefully we won't get there. But we're trying to bring a measure of control over our own people. And some people have suggested that we've had our own version of a coup. And some hypothesize that it's Soviet-led, which is ironic. Now, I don't hold fast to this narrative of a Soviet-led coup. I do think countries like the Soviet Union are models for this administration because it's much easier to implement changes if you have more control over your people. And we are already seeing these themes play out. We are more focused internally on dismantling international trade and immigration, our media and free speech, our governmental and educational institutions, and access to shared public services. And this effort is likely to continue and to reach a boiling point at the exact conjunction next year. Now, will the United States Constitution survive as we know it today, or will it be completely rewritten or reinterpreted? Well, stick with me as we experience these transits together. We will soon find out. So we had the new moon in Cancer right after the ceasefire that was brokered between Israel and Iran by the United States, or by our president more specifically. Now, if you remember that chart, the new moon happened in the 12th house, placed in Washington. So it happened behind the scenes and nobody really knows what was brokered because of this behind the scenes effort. The news was announced the night of the 23rd when Sun squared Neptune. Now, this transit is overly optimistic. It sometimes means we're not seeing clearly. And then the next day, the president rebuked both parties for initially breaking that ceasefire. And that was when Mercury was squaring Chiron. Now, thankfully, we had a void moon for most of the day on the 24th, so it was a perfect time for a ceasefire. Interestingly, during that same Sun square Neptune transit, SCOTUS ruled on their dark docket that while the main case was being adjudicated, the administration could go ahead and deport immigrants to a third world country other than their own without notice or due process. So that was also not seen clearly kind of event that happened in the dark and without any reasoning behind it. We didn't get any explanation of why they ruled that way. On July the 2nd, the moon squares the sun. And this is what I was teasing at the beginning of this video, because it's what you call a first quarter square in a longer 2-year sun moon cycle that started during the Libra eclipse in October 2024. During this eclipse, we saw a ramping up of Israel incursions into the West Bank and airstrikes in Gaza, and the start of the Israeli invasion of Lebanon. So after this new invasion of Israel into Iran, there is some tension. There's a question of goal. Where does this all end, and at what cost of innocent lives? The main cycle that started with the horrendous Hamas attacks in 2023 is going to have its closing square on July 17th. So this part of the cycle is closing. Hamas has been clearly decimated, but this new cycle, which looks to be the expansion of Israel's efforts to root out the threats against them, will not reach its closing square until the end of 2026. And since the United States just entered into a new cycle with the attacks happening near the Cancer new moon, this launches us into a new 2-year cycle with Iran that won't complete until September of 2027. It doesn't mean that we'll be at war with Iran, but the themes of this strike will likely go through very distinct phases through the completion of this cycle. So we've just catapulted ourselves into this involvement with what's going to happen between ourselves and Iran and Israel and Iran. So now let's shift to talking about the United States solar return that happens on July the 4th. It coincides with Neptune stationing retrograde, and it happens right after Uranus and Venus meet up for their yearly conjunction at the 29th degree of Taurus. It's interesting to note that Uranus and Venus repeats this conjunction at 29 degrees Taurus in 2026. They don't start their Gemini cycle until 2027. This seems to imply a longer transition of our changing values and monetary systems. Neptune last went retrograde at 29 degrees Pisces on July the 2nd, 2024. That day, the Supreme Court issued the president's immunity ruling. There was also a religious stampede and Hurricane Beryl that happened that day. Very Neptunian themes. This year, with Neptune going retrograde in Aries, we can already see themes of record-setting heat waves. And since it's that season, we may see something related to fire or volcanic eruptions. So now let's take a look at the chart. We are in a fixed cross this year with fixed elements on the angles and a fixed watery moon. This indicates that change may be incredibly difficult, and it feeds into the dark emotions that a Scorpio moon describes. The moon is related to the people in a mundane chart, and Scorpio is co-ruled by Pluto. Pluto is on the ascendant, and so it's very much about transformation. And transformation can be very dark and it's hidden. So there's a lot of power structures that are feeding into these dark emotions that are coming out of the Scorpio moon. Scorpio is also ruled traditionally by Mars, and Mars is in the 7th house of this chart. And that involves our relationships with others. And so we are at war with each other, basically. And Pluto, the power structures, are feeding into that war. We are bringing the Sibley chart's nodes and the 2nd and 8th house axis to the ascendant and descendant of this solar return chart. And we're facing a crucial year in our evolutionary karmic direction. And the Mercury degree is right near our president's Pluto degree. And we already know that he's a catalyst for this broader change that is happening in the United States. And the 2nd and 8th house axis deals with our national wealth, our revenue, and all places and activities concerned with money making, such as banks, the stock exchange, financial institutions, money markets, and trade. And the 8th house has to do with public mortality, our death rate, the kinds of people who die, death duties, and financial relations with foreign countries. So these are going to be important topics for this year. We have a retrograde Pluto in Aquarius on the ascendant, like I mentioned. And remember the power of those bunker bombs I spoke about in the new moon in Cancer chart. It's the power structures we are presenting to the world and we're presenting to the people, but it's also the hidden power structures that we can't see and the profound shifts taking place in our country underneath the surface. Mercury in Leo on the descendant, it's now separating from an opposition to Pluto. And Mercury is how we communicate with the world, the media, trade, and commerce. And in Leo, it's dramatic and proud. It can be a bit grandstanding, as we've seen lately. These planets are creating a T-square aspect with the moon in the 9th house, and that's the 11th house of the Sibley chart. The moon in Scorpio is separating from a closing square to Pluto and applying to a square to Mercury. Now, like I said, the moon is typically considered to be the people in a mundane chart. And in Scorpio, it's indicative of intense feelings of fear, mistrust, and protectionism that's happening right now in the United States. We are feeling deep-seated emotions around the topics of immigration, our judicial system, higher education, and our overseas involvement. There's a lot of mistrust with both the hidden power structures of our past and how this is communicated in the outer world through the media and our leadership. We see that there's a direction beyond democracy that is being communicated, but which direction will it take us? Right now, it's taking us toward an extreme fascism type of government ruled by intimidation and fear. That is reflected in the moon. People are afraid. There's also an overall lack of trust in the media and democratic structures, which are getting worse rather than better. We long for security, to be able to nurture our individual spirit and to raise happy and healthy children with access to more resources. So how we feel about the people internally in this United States and about immigrants has a lot to do with this access to more resources, who gets it and who doesn't. And people are thinking about themselves because they're in survival mode and they see that they need to think about themselves. And it's easy to pin the blame on other people because that's what propaganda does. It scapegoats other people. They want more power. So they're basically saying that if we kick out all of these people, we'll have more resources. Now, is that true? Probably not. But that's the story that people are being fed. And the United States is experiencing its Jupiter return this solar year. And that's a very important. It's happening right on this solar return chart. And Jupiter is in the 7th house of the Sibley chart, conjunct the sun. We are ready for some Jupiter blessings, fertile growth to emerge in our partnerships. But Saturn has also entered the sign of its natal opposition. Saturn is in Libra in the 10th house of the Sibley chart. When we act from diplomacy, from a place of fairness and concern for our partners, we can grow more fruitfully. But when we act from a place of egoism and force, our blessings will be restrictive. We may receive them, but they will come at a very high cost. 9/11 happened after a Jupiter return. As a people, we are growing more alarmed with many of our trusted allies, media organizations, higher learning institutions seemingly capitulating under pressure. We are having difficulties adjusting to the back and forth trade wars and conflicts. We see the economy getting worse, even though it's not reported. We are becoming more and more afraid to speak out, to protest as we see the ramifications of these protests. Mercury is describing a public embrace of powerful forces and a private resentment of their power. Then we have Uranus at the last degree of Taurus sitting on the IC of this chart, and Venus is moving just beyond the conjunction now in Gemini. We are bringing the Sibley 6th house to the 4th house. So it's basically the dismantling of our public institutions. Our health can be affected. It is going to be causing a lot of tumultuous changes in our governmental institutions this year. And we don't know where to place our focus. Our foundations, our public safety nets, our national security is being completely uprooted all at once. So we don't know which end is up. We are dealing with topics like who belongs here and who doesn't, who deserves access to resources and who doesn't, who has rights versus who doesn't. Now, there's a silver lining of hope in this chart, depending on how you look at it. There's a mini talent triangle forming between Uranus, Pluto, and Saturn and Neptune, implying that we can quickly learn to adapt to these societal changes for good or bad. It's suggesting progressive shifts in how we manage our resources for good or bad. We may get lucky and experience breakthroughs in technology or in governance that improves our lives, possibly for some and not for others. And I am very interested to see how this plays out, as it's really hard to see these changes with optimism right at this moment. But I've been surprised a lot with some of the moves and the results of those moves. So I'm hoping for the best, and I hope you do too. And the moon is the final dispositor in this chart. So we do have the power to change the current trajectory, but we're going to have to fight through our fear and pessimism. We have to fight for these changes. It won't be easy because of this fixed energy, but we must stand up for a fair judiciary and the right to access shared resources, the right for human dignity and due process, fundamental rights that we have frankly taken for granted in the United States. We've allowed money interests to control our government for too long, and now we are choking. We have a deep cellular memory in the United States of the conditions that we are willing to accept versus those that we are not. We have to fight for our survival and more successfully manage the propaganda and power grabs that are happening in our country. We have to fight for them tooth and nail. No leader is going to come in and save us, as the people with power create this fear in us about socialism. And yet they welcome this other extreme. It doesn't allow for growth either. Extremes will not hold in the long run unless they are held by force. And that force strangles the life of a country. We see it in other countries, and yet we want to produce it in ours for some reason. We have to band together and do the hard work to fight for the things that matter the most to us. It's not going to be easy to move in such a fixed environment, but we do have the power. The sun, or those in authority, sit in the 6th house of this chart. The public servants have forgotten that this is what they were voted to do, to serve the people, not the other way around. They are not here to serve the minority. They need to get to work on the details of how they're going to lead us out of the mess that we've currently found ourselves in, with a huge disparity in those that have money and power and those that do not. And we need to demand radical changes in our governance. And we need to find others who are more fit to serve the people rather than just the tiny percentage at top. Uranus ingresses into Gemini just 3 days after the solar return, so it will shift the energy a significant amount. Lots of shifts in July, with Saturn and Mercury both going retrograde mid-month. That's it for me today. I'll be back next week to talk about the upcoming Capricorn full moon, which happens mid-month as well. It's going to be another tough month, but we'll get through this if we just keep fighting. Till next time, bye.